Hey everybody, and welcome to another social psych lecture video. Today we're going to be talking about attribution. So this is part of the social cognitive aspect to the first part of the class. We talked about the self, we talked about social cognition in general, and now we're going to focus specifically on thinking about how and why other people do what they do. So this one's going to be relatively short to the previous three videos that you may have watched. I don't know what order that you're watching them in, but if you are watching them in order, yes, episodes 1, 2, and 3, lectures 1, 2, and 3 were quite long. This one's going to be a smidge shorter. It's less stuff that I have for you. Okay, so the outline for this set of slides, again, a short one. So let's define what attribution is, a little bit better than what I did at on the title slide there. So how do we figure out how and why people are doing and thinking things? We'll specifically talk about Kelley's model of attribution. It's a little bit involved, and it's the only one that we're talking about. Many textbooks in social psych, including the students in my class, there are multiple models that are discussed in the chapter. We're only going to talk about Kelley's model. And then we're going to talk about when this attribution stuff goes wrong. And we're going to specifically talk about what is called the fundamental attribution error, or FAE. And this is a bias that people have, and a specific kind of people. I'll tell you about that when we get to it. Okay. So attribution is just a fancy way of saying, how do I explain other people's behaviors? So attribution is the process, the cognitive process, by which people use information to make inferences about the causes of behaviors events. So it's attribution theory is the umbrella term that's used to describe the theoretical explanations of how people assign causes to the events around them. So they're answers to why questions. Things like, why didn't Michael call me back? Why didn't my friend call me on my birthday? Why did my current significant other ask about my previous significant other? The other questions we will ask are, why are attributions important? Well, they help us control and predict our social world, how we're interacting with other people. We need to have some sort of guidance, some sort of information about what we expect to come next based on what we've encountered before. Attributions also help determine our feelings. So our emotions in any given time, our attitudes, so how we think and feel about certain things, positive or negative, and our behaviors. Our attributions are going to dictate how we then behave in relation to the attribution that we just made about another person. Okay, so how we're going to look at these is what's called causal attribution. So the reason for the person thinking and behaving in that way. And there are two important dimensions for causal attributions. The first one is the locus of the cause. So where does it originate? There are two levels to the locus. One level is an internal locus for the cause. So something about that person, okay? So the actor of the behavior or the thoughts. Can't really observe thoughts directly, but so we have to really determine causes by behaviors. And then opposite to internal is external. So it's an external locus. So it's about the situation, not about the person. So a good way to think of external locus, causal attribution, is that it can be anything but the person. The second dimension is stability. So is the stability of the cause something that happens often? Is it chronic or stable? Or is it temporary or unstable? Okay. So stable or chronic, is something that's likely to remain present. So for example, somebody's personality. That's pretty stable, right? Unstable or temporary is unlikely to remain present. So that could be a friend or family member's mood or time of day, something like that. So a couple more examples for you. Why did Samantha ignore you? Now, there are 4 ways in which we could talk about this. All the combinations of locus and stability, but I'm only going to give you 2 just to munch on for a little bit. So it was raining outside and she didn't look up. So this is an external locus because it has nothing to do with the person itself. The rain is environmental, obviously. And she didn't look up. Well, raining is, while raining as a weather phenomenon is chronic, yes, it rains often, unless you're in like some sort of desert environment where it doesn't rain often. And you're like, that was unstable. This one would be considered unstable because she didn't look up because it was raining, not for any other reason. And so it was some sort of temporary, fleeting thing. Okay, so that's why this would be considered unstable. Now let me compare it to the second one, which is the opposite, essentially. She is a snob. Very quick causal attribution about Samantha. Snob is something about her, Samantha, and snob is a personality trait. Like it or not, it's a personality trait. Not all personality traits are positive. Snob is a personality trait, and it is 100% negative, unless you like snobs for whatever reason. So this would be stable because it's a personality trait. It's something about Samantha and lasts for Samantha. She is snobbish. Okay? So that would be internal and stable. Now, you can do the other 2 if you'd like in your working out of this. So think of something that may be external but stable. Like she has a neck condition. No, that's internal and stable. So her neck condition. I have one. She was wearing one of those gigantic ponchos. So it's not about her, even though she was wearing it. It's still external. She's wearing those gigantic poncho hoods, but she wears it all the time, so she never sees anybody. I don't know. Something about that. You can work through some of those examples. The other 2 possibilities, external stable and internal unstable, if you'd like on this one. Now, one of the ways that these are influenced, one of these 4 attributions are influenced is your explanatory style, how you explain events in a habitual way. So what is your typical way of explaining things that happen to you? Okay. How is it going to change the way that you go from external to internal or unstable to stable, so on and so forth? So that's your explanatory style. You can consider explanatory style something like on the dimension of optimism to pessimism. That's one facet of explanatory style. So are you pessimistic or are you optimistic? That sort of thing. This is not the only way somebody can have an explanatory style, but it is one way, just to have something for you to munch on. Let's talk about Kelley's model. This is Kelley's model. This is a diagram of Kelley's model, nice flow chart. So it's Kelley's model of covariation. Covariation here is just his fancy word for explaining how different attributions take shape. And here we have 6 different kinds of attributions along 3 dimensions. Okay. So Kelley decided that this model is algorithmic. Okay. So the covariation principle is behavior should be attributed to potential causes that co-occur with behavior. So we decide whether it's external or internal, whether something is specific to a situation or general about that person, using these 3 types of information. So internal, external. So whether something is specific to the situation or general about that person, actually should flip that to make it internal, general about a person, or external, something specific, using these 3 types of information. Those 3 types of information are consensus, consistency, and distinctiveness. Consensus is how do other people behave? And he made these continua. Okay, so these are dimensional. There's space in between. And so he highlights here in this model highs and lows. Okay, so how do other people behave? Well, if there is high consensus, most people will behave like this. Just think of the word consensus. It's being used here as we use it in many other ways. Okay. Low consensus is not many people behave this way. Not many people behave this way. So high and low. Consistency is the second one. Does a person X usually behave this way or not? So high consistency is that X nearly always behaves like this all the time. Low, on the other hand, X seldom behaves like this. Okay, so high consistency is across all situations. Low consistency, seldomly like this. And then the final piece is distinctiveness. Is X's behavior in this situation different from X's behavior in other situations? So high distinctiveness, X does not behave like this in most other situations. And so it's very distinct that this behavior is occurring like this. Low distinctiveness, X does not behave like this in most other situations. So it's very low distinctiveness. X behaves like this in most other situations. I don't know if I said that correctly. So high is not behave, so it's different from the pack. Low distinctiveness is it's really hard to disentangle this behavior from any other situations. Okay, so consensus, consistency, and distinctiveness. And so if we take these 3 pieces of information and apply it back to internal and external, we can sort of make adjustments on what happens when an internal attribution is made versus an external attribution. So, for example, an internal attribution is likely going to have high consensus. Most people behave like this. High distinctiveness. X does not behave like this in other situations. So something about this situation. And high consistency. X nearly always behaves like this. Okay, so something about that person is leading me to think about them in this way. That's an internal attribution. External attributions put more emphasis on the situation. So what ends up happening is you end up having low consensus, low distinctiveness, and low consistency. So not many people behave like this. This person seldom behaves like this. And this person behaves like this in most other situations. So something about the situation is leading this person to have issues. Something about the situation is leading that person to think in that way. The last point I'll make about Kelley's model here is that it is important that we consider attribution to be a rational process. It's the biggest complaint I have with Kelley's model, is that the assumption is a rational process. And I will tell you that attributions, while generally speaking decent among humans in general, we are not very good at determining the causes for other people's behaviors. And thus, I do not believe it fits with the definition, from my perspective, of a rational process. Now, Kelley argues that it is a rational process, but it is not. So let's talk about when the attribution process does go wrong. And let's talk about the fundamental attribution error, FAE. This is the strong tendency to attribute other people's behavior to character or disposition, so internal causes, than to situational factors, external causes. So it's a strong tendency to think somebody behaved in a certain way because of who they are, not the situation that they are in. This is obviously an error because we don't know. We don't know. So, a study for you, Jones and Harris, 1967. It's important because it's about Fidel Castro. So 1967 is the correct date here. So students at Duke were asked to read an essay about Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba. This is after like the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. They were told this essay was written in response to the instructions, quote, write a short, cogent, connected essay either defending or criticizing Castro's Cuba as if you were giving the opening statement in a debate. Half read a pro argument and half read a con argument. Then they were asked to rate the essayist's, the person who wrote the essay, attitude toward Castro's Cuba. Okay, so again, students at Duke were asked to read an essay about Fidel Castro's Cuba. So the essay was written in response. So the participants didn't actually write a response. So criticizing Cuba as if you were giving the opening statement in a debate. So half read a pro argument, half read a con argument. Okay, defending or criticizing. Pro was defending, con was criticizing. I hope that makes sense. So not surprisingly, when the participants rated these essayists, they came up with these responses. Okay, so in the pro essay, when their stance was chosen for them, pro or con, they almost 2/3 rated the essay as more favorable. They thought the person who wrote the essay was super strong Castro supporter. And people who were given the anti-communist essay, anti-Castro government essay, they didn't rate them as strong. In another condition, they were told the essayists were assigned to the essay. So here, the essayist was said to have chosen pro or con, and the participants rated the essayist's attitude. Here, they were assigned pro or con, and you can see the effect is still there about how they view the favorability of the essayists' attitude toward Castro's government, this tendency to assume disposition from behavior, this is almost 50%, is very strong. Very strong. You expect to see this red bar high and this brown bar low if you ask somebody to do something that they want to do or don't want to do. You know, speaking from their attitude. Okay, yeah, that's their attitude, so that's a dispositional factor. But when this stance is assigned, it's situational. It becomes situational. When their stance is assigned, it becomes situational. This is disposition. These two bars reflect character and disposition. That's a correct attribution. I think this is pretty good. Situational factors, though, apply to these two bars. The essayists didn't have a choice for which stance they had to argue. And yet, participants rated the attitude according to the stance the person wrote, the essayist wrote. Participants inferred that the author's true attitude matched the position advocated in the essay, even when told that the author had no choice in what position they took for the essay. And that's incredible. This is a statistically significant difference, by the way. So even though a correct attribution would be external in this case, the participants used internal attributions as the reason for the essay. That's wild, right? That's a wild ride. So why do we do this? What's the reasoning behind this? Well, one reason could be a belief in a just world. It's called the just world hypothesis. People get what they deserve. Why? Because it's comforting. It hides the fact that the universe is full of chaos, that entropy is always increasing. By telling ourselves that people on food stamps must not have worked hard enough, we protect ourselves from the thought that we could lose our own jobs at any minute, and I'm sure that has happened to you or people that you know in the last few months. And we're not done, right? So the just world hypothesis shields us from the negatives that exist in life. Another reason is perceptual salience. So we're gathering information from our senses. We see somebody do something. So the elements of the environment that readily capture our attention, these are the salient things, seemingly are more likely to be causally important. People, because we are a social being, we are a social animal, people stand out more than the situation, unless it's just like some really, really distinct situation. People stand out, and so we base our attributions on the people rather than the environment because the people are more salient. So here's a classic example for you. Participants watched a video of a conversation, and they could only see one or both of the people in the conversation. Okay. When asked who was more responsible for setting the tone of the conversation, participants who only saw one person assigned more responsibility to the person that they could see rather than the person they couldn't see, compared to the participants who got to see both people in the conversation. In another similar study, one person in a bright shirt and another person in a muted shirt having a conversation. The person who was in the bright shirt was viewed and perceived as more responsible for setting the tone of the conversation because the brightness of the shirt is more salient than the muted shirt of the other person. It's subtle things like that. It's subtle things like that just counterintuitively blow your mind. The third one that I want to mention is self-serving bias or self-serving attributional bias. It's a bias that is complementary to the fundamental attribution error, and so we can see these sorts of things working together. So the self-serving bias is the tendency to attribute our own failures to external reasons and success to internal ones, because that protects our self-esteem. Okay, so for the ease of examples, imagine winning or losing a game. Okay, sometimes it is completely rational to use this bias. So if students fail test 1, teacher changes strategies for test 2, then they fail again. Oh, if they improved, good teacher. If they didn't, bad students. So think about it. If the teacher is making the attribution and the students don't do as well from the first test or don't do well on the second test after strategy is changed, but they improve, well, then something's working. And as a teacher, I'm getting better at my job. But if they didn't get better, if they just failed at the same level, well, then the something must be bad about the students. So this is self-serving. Now, culture plays a big role in this, in fundamental attribution error, because all these Westerners seem to do it. But context is key. Before I talk about Westerners versus Eastern cultures, most of the world's people pay more attention to social situations than Westerners do. So this was seen in a study by Masuda and colleagues in 2004. Participants were asked to rate the mood of a central figure who was surrounded by smaller faces, either sad or happy. The surrounding faces did not influence American participant ratings, but Japanese participants, so this is what would be considered a cross-cultural study, but Japanese participants rated the happy face as less happy when surrounded by sad faces. So American participants didn't care about what the surrounding faces are. They only looked at the target. However, Japanese participants were like, "Ooh, that central figure is less happy because it's being surrounded by unhappy faces." So something about this context is really important. Okay? So generally speaking, dispositionalism is far more common in individualistic cultures than collectivistic. So while FAE is present in Eastern cultures, I want to say that there's not a shadow of a doubt that this is not a human this is a human universal. It is much less pronounced in Eastern cultures. Okay. In another study, participants were first asked to write an essay favoring a certain position before seeing someone else write a similar essay, kind of like the Castro study I went over. With this direct experience of being required to advocate a certain position, Korean participants recognize how powerful the situation is, and as a result, make no assumptions about the other essay writer. That's critical. They make no assumptions about the other essay writer. That's crazy. American participants, on the other hand, learn nothing from the experience and still make assumptions about the target's personal beliefs based on an essay that they just read. Korean participants don't make any assumptions about that person. They just read an essay. Americans, however, read that essay, make assumptions about this person. You can clearly see that dispositionalism occurring now with respect to Black Lives Matter and COVID and all of the ills that are shaping American conversations right now. There's a lot. We think a lot about as Americans, as Westerners, we think a lot about the people behind the things that we read. And we make assumptions about them. So what are the consequences of attributions? Well, one, you'll probably get punched in the face if you do it wrong. I'm just kidding. You may not. You may not get punched in the face. It depends. What are the cognitive and social consequences? What are the psychological consequences of attributions? Well, let's talk about this in context of couples. So romantic couples, unhappy couples versus happy couples. Do they differ in the types of attributions they make? So let's talk about Fincham and Bradbury, 1990. So the summary of their findings with respect to these two kinds of couples, unhappy versus happy. Happy couples use what are called relationship enhancing attributions. So bad behavior is viewed through a lens that is external, unstable, with low responsibility. Okay? So bad behavior is seen as caused by the situation, it's temporary, and the person shouldn't feel guilty about its occurrence or recurrence. Good behavior is internal, stable, relational, and high responsibility. So partners view good behavior as attributable to the person. They are good, and I like them. Unhappy couples do what's called distress maintaining attributions. So flip those. Bad behavior is viewed as internal, stable, relational, and high responsibility. You do bad behavior. You cheat on me because you're once a cheater, always a cheater. Relational, and you're highly responsible for it. Okay. Good behavior, on the other hand, is like, why did you do this nice thing for me? I don't like the fact that you did this nice thing for me. It's ew. It's gross. Oh, So it's external, temporary, low responsibility. Okay. However, I do want to make a point about whether you think yourself if you're in a relationship and you think of yourself as happy or unhappy, you can actually view it through these lenses now and see whether or not you are relationship enhancing or distress maintaining. This research is correlational. Not all happy couples do relationship enhancing. Not all unhappy couples do distress maintaining. Okay. So do maladaptive attributions cause relationship distress, or is it the other way around? Do relationship distresses cause maladaptive attributions? This is very important. There's the bidirectionality problem. So, of course, we cannot infer causality, nor can we do a real experiment on this with random assignment. We cannot do a true experiment on this because we cannot randomly assign happy couples and unhappy couples. We cannot take two people and be like, you're going to be a happy couple. We cannot take another two people and be like, you know what? My coin said tails, you're going to be an unhappy couple. Let's see what happens. We can't do that. That would be quite unethical. Even though Nick Lachey and Vanessa Lachey tried to do that on Love is Blind. Kinda. I'm not saying they did that, but it kind of feels like that. The other thing that you need to make this a better study with stronger conclusions is that it should be longitudinal. They didn't do this longitudinally. Because there are a few things that longitudinal studies will show regarding this. Pessimistic attributions generally predict relationship deterioration over time. So pessimism is an explanatory style, as I mentioned. Satisfaction colors attributions. So, for example, happy couples make more relationship enhancing attributions over time. So it's sort of cumulative over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. It's cumulative. But there's also personality involved in this. Happy couples and unhappy couples are not happy and unhappy in vacuums. Personality comes into play. Things like neuroticism or anxious attachments can lead to pessimistic attributions and poor relationship functioning, right? Our explanatory styles commingle with our personality traits, and this can then lead to issues over time. Okay, so that is what I want to tell you about attribution. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by, taking a watch, taking a listen. Please leave your comments, feedback down below. I appreciate it. Until the next video, bye.